Hi, folks. This is a lecture on middle adulthood. We're really talking about 35 to 60-year-olds. It's a long span. A 35-year-old is somewhat different than a 60-year-old in many respects. But in developmental psychology, that's currently the rough breakout ages. As life goes forward, the age numbers are less exact and are marked by fewer concrete sorts of items that would demark such changes. But there are some things that are important to know right at the outset. And one is that the life expectancy has increased dramatically since particularly 1900, when in the United States, the average age at which people died was around 50. And now for females, let's see, females around 82, males around 75, 76. That's different. In 2030, it's going to be an average of 80. If it continues, we'll have to wait and see. When you have major events like global wars or pandemics, that suppresses the life expectancy statistics that you get. Yeah. So if we're talking about middle adulthood, we're really talking about a time of transition, a time of acceptance of changes that are both physical and psychological. We don't stop growing and changing just because our number shifts. Well, women live longer. Women smoke less. Women drink less. Women have less dangerous jobs, as well as being different genetically from men. Men are different than women genetically and hormonally and so on. But you see a difference, and therefore what you get at the end of this stage around 60, but particularly after 70, is more women living alone whose partners have died. And so you begin to get more women who are interested in relationships, finding male partners in the heterosexual community, of course, than there are available. By 80, it's about 3 or 4 women for every male who's available for a relationship. That is, we're talking about people who are not in relationships. So there are a lot of stereotypes about aging, and the negative ones are called ageism, and it disproportionately affects females, unfortunately, because the value in general, as we see it from a cultural standpoint, is higher for people who are capable of producing offspring. For males, it's their entire life, and for females, it's a limited range, maybe up until 40, 45, somewhere along in there, although there are exceptions, of course. So in Western society, in particular, there are very negative stereotypes and words and slurs about women, far more often than there are men. In other societies, the older you are, the more revered you are. If you were an older female, it might make sense to think about, some people think, in another culture. Yes? Interesting. The big thing about aging in general is the quality of relationships you have, whether they be friends or family or lovers. And you can do quite well, male or female, without a partner. That would be icing on the cake. But you can do quite well without a partner, as long as you have other connections that are substantial and respectful. Okay. Now, height reaches a maximum around the mid-20s and remains stable until about 50, and then thereafter begins to subside a bit. Males lose about an inch beginning in the 50 to 55 range, and females lose a couple of inches, and that has to do with mainly spinal compression. Men and women both gain about 10 pounds per decade beginning in the 30s, but exercise and dietary adjustments, that is to say mainly not eating what you used to eat when you were young, can make a big difference. Strength generally decreases, but not by much. By 60, only about 10% of maximum strength is lost. And again, exercise can keep that in check and maybe even improve things. There are some chronic illnesses that we see. Osteoarthritis is very typical, beginning around age 40, in joints like knees, shoulders, hips. Type 2 diabetes, particularly if you're overweight, is more commonly diagnosed. Hypertension goes with weight gain, but is also genetically related to things like whether or not you're Native American, Black, or Caucasian, or Hispanic. Those sorts of things vary according to genetics as well as weight. But we want people to maintain a reasonable weight for their frame. Yes. We see visual changes like presbyopia, which is basically the same as farsightedness. That is to say, you're losing nearsightedness, and so you would need to wear glasses. That's very common. There's a decrease in depth perception as you get into the 50s and 60s, particularly in the 60s and 70s, and you have trouble with then distance perception, three-dimensional assessment, and night vision seems to get worse, and mainly because you're seeing less light. Your vision is less able to perceive light. So let's talk about male and female reproductive and sexual changes. There's something called the female climacteric, which is a transition from being able to bear children to a position in which you're unable to bear children. And so we have what's called perimenopause, which are the years prior to menopause, which is a process. And that's 45 to 48 about in the United States for most people, where menstruation is irregular for about 2 years, and then there's a loss of estrogen and progesterone, and then menopause is the beginning of the cessation of menstrual flow. And so we say someone is beyond menopause when they have a year without any periods, barring other medical issues. Not everybody has symptoms of menopause. That's as much stereotype as anything else. But if you get them, they could be hot flashes or headaches or dizziness or joint ache, reduction in vaginal lubrication, which then may require a lubricant. What about half of all people have no symptoms whatsoever? Just so you know, Asian females have the fewest symptoms of all. Okay, we could replace estrogen, but that has to do with a case-by-case analysis because there is a greater breast cancer risk, benign fibroid tumors, uterine tumors, and blood clots. There may be some uterine cancer increase too. But the pros seem to outweigh other things being equal. It reduces hot flashes, it increases skin elasticity, increases the thickness of the density of bones, reduces osteoporosis, therefore reduces stroke and colon cancers. It reduces the risk of coronary disease, and it increases vaginal lubrication and vaginal lining thickness. So those are connected to some sexual changes for which ERT, estrogen replacement therapy, might be useful. For males, the climacteric is a male climacteric, and it's sometimes affectionately called andropause. Some people say in a funny way menopause. I think that's kind of silly, but it's a period of changes in sexual systems beginning in late middle age, beginning in the 50s. Usually enlargement of the prostate gland, which causes squeezing of the tube that runs through it, the urethra, which causes males to not feel like they can void their bladder completely, and so they get up during the night feeling the urgency but never can quite empty themselves. Another thing that happens is that they may have more difficulty attaining and maintaining adequate erections for sexual activity. Difficulty with attaining ejaculation, and there are things that I list in the PowerPoint associated with that. Men still produce sperm and can still father children all the way to the end of their lives, as I mentioned earlier in the video. Okay? In terms of relationships, we just want to say that a good marriage is not without sexuality. That's a myth. Old people want to have old people. In this group, that's younger. I'm in the next grade. I'm 66, so that's the old age, the old people. That's not true about any age. People retain their interest. They have to modify their behavior and maybe obtain help from sex therapists or medical interventions to make some differences in their sexual abilities. When couples view their partners or spouses as best friends, things are much better. When they share things. When they view marriage or partnership as a durable commitment, one that they're going to work on and through the difficult times of, that makes a big difference. Believing that your partner or your spouse can be known at deeper levels and not stopping to interact with each other and know what each other is all about at depth, yes? So what we want are people to continue to be interested in sexual activity and find their way through problems and adapt to them, get help when they can. For females, OBGYNs, for males, urologists, usually. For couples experiencing problems that are not medically related, that are sexual, a sex therapist is the place to go. Also, sex therapists are usually competent and trained, though one should check, to address problems that may have medically related issues attached to them when there are sexual problems, okay? But we must remember that marriage and love doesn't conquer everything, and we're not going to be all excited to see our partner when they come back from a shopping trip as our dog does. That's just not going to happen. That getting married when you're older is not going to make you happy. That's just not going to happen. Divorce is difficult. It's more difficult on women than men, usually for financial reasons. And the way to fix that is to equalize the money attachments. So everybody's on everybody's signature, and each person is each other's beneficiary. And you see your way as quickly as possible to being free of debt as best you can. Start saving early in life. Get into a Roth IRA early in life. This is direct advice, which I am not usually giving, but that's an interest-free loan. You get one across your lifespan. You can put several thousand a year into it, and whatever interest you gain through a 401k or whatever you set it up in, you get to keep. You don't have to pay taxes on that. That can make you very wealthy if you start very, very young and keep pumping money into it. Oh well, on from there. As you get older, you have a chance to be a grandparent. And unfortunately, with today's difficulties financially, you may end up being in the sandwich generation, wherein you're taking care of your parents and your children who may still be at home. And that can offer lots of stress and maybe even caregiver burnout, which we want to be careful about. So overall, psychological changes include women shifting towards greater self-assurance and accomplishment and assertiveness, and males kind of go in the other direction. They become more introspective and focus more on intimate relationships and being more nurturant. That's a great shift to have. That allows men and women to cross over in a very great way. I don't know why I just did that. Okay. So some people, and it's not common, but some people can't tolerate getting older and they wish they were younger, and they kind of invent themselves as if they were younger, and they do crazy things like divorce or quit a job and start dating younger people, and that's a real extreme example. It's a measure of, in any extent of such a thing, of our loathing of getting older, and that's more common in Western countries, you see, because youth is valued as opposed to age. Darn it. Well, so what's some things to talk about? One of the things we want to talk about is, just very briefly, that we want to become more generative as we get older, where we help the younger generation. That contributes us into the next generation. So, see you next time. Bye-bye.